as you'll have seen from my title slide, I'm talking today about multiple decision makers in the pursuit of multiple goals. So for those of you who don't know me, I think most of you do, but my name is Erin. I'm a PhD candidate and a master's student here in the Centre of Organ Business Lab. I am part of the Dynamics of Work Lab, which is a new name we're trialling, slightly more catchy than the previous one. But I'm supervised by Professor Andrew Neil and Dr. Tim Ballard, who are here with us today, and who is not here with us but has been instrumental to my work in the lab, is Dr. Hector Plata. So just a bit of an overview around what I'll be talking about today. I'll give you a bit of an introduction to the topic of multiple goal pursuit and what we mean by multiple decision makers. I'll give you some of the background, why this is important, what do we already know, what don't we know. I'll explain the experimental paradigm that I've leveraged throughout the course of my PhD, as well as going into a little bit of detail around the research. I'll try and skip over some of the more heavy details surrounding the studies and the results and the computational modelling. I'll give you the fun insights, not the weeks of depressively bad results. And then by the end, I'm hoping actually that I always lost your attention because I lost steam when making these slides. But no, I'll talk a little bit about the implications of the research and sort of where to from there. And hopefully we'll have some time as well at the end for questions. I'm happy for you guys throughout, if you've got a question, if something, I'll give you sort of the abridged version, I guess, of my PhD. So there'll be details I might skim over, but if you do have any questions that relate to what I'm talking about at the time, feel free to put your hand up and ask a question, that's fine. If you do have questions that are more of a discussion, sort of discussion-based, as I said, there'll be time at the end. So I wanted to quickly, actually, can I just test that this works? Can everyone, there's not a lot to do with, I don't even know if I'll need it, but it's my cat's laser, and I just thought that would be fun for my own amusement. Right, so I wanted to introduce sort of the topic that I'm talking about today by drawing our attention to the most important part of all our days, which is, of course, our Wordles, obviously. If you don't know what this is, I have concerns for you, but also briefly, it is, you have 6 attempts to guess a 5-letter word. If you get a word in the right place, a letter, sorry, in the right place, it goes green. If you get a letter in, it's the right letter but the wrong place, it goes yellow. And if it's not in the word, it remains grey. And this has become, this game, which has slowly become my life, has also become a bit of a problem for me in my day-to-day life. As I'm sure as many of you have experienced, it's become increasingly competitive. And in my family chat, we are particularly ruthless. And as I'm sure you have all experienced as well, there's been much discussion about what is the best starting 5-letter word. And I have recently been caught out with this. My desire to assert my dominance with the best starting 5-letter word has resulted in everyone capitalising it and my performance slumping quite a bit as I realise everyone's waiting for me to do the Wordle and then see how well my 5-letter word does. So here, what I'm trying to explain is this is sort of a poor example, I guess, of how in everyday lives we pursue competing goals. I wanted to be the best at Wordle. I also wanted to have the best 5-letter word at Wordle. And it turned out I couldn't do both. This idea of pursuing competing demands is something that we experience universally in our day-to-day lives, more so than we probably realise. It involves us strategically regulating these goals such that we make trade-offs, prioritising one over the other. Again, just another example, Ash Barty retiring from tennis, trying to prioritise her love and career in tennis versus the other pursuits of her life. We have to make trade-offs, and sometimes we make the wrong ones as well. Not to say that she did. Very happy crash party. But these, yeah, it's not recorded, right? But essentially, that sometimes these decisions have implications for our performance and our work outcomes. So what do we know? So we know this is something that we do every day. It's something that has implications for our performance, particularly in workplaces. And this has led to a nice little area of research, multiple goal pursuit, which is sort of where my research is based. It has shown us that there, yes?
I'm sorry, my old eyes are struggling to read what's on the presentation there. Is there a button to close that button? I'll do it less.
Lighting.
Really light here in that tree.
Yeah, no. Potentially no full design of there. It's just lines.
It's not letting me close them.
No lines?
Stop doing that.
What are the issues? Actually. Oh, there we go. Is that slightly better? Apologies, I have made the text quite small. With feedback next time. Essentially, as I was saying, this area of multiple goal pursuit has identified that there are different factors that help us make these prioritization decisions, and they help us choose between which goal we should be attending to and which one we're happy to make the sacrifice for. All this research has led to the development of this quite, looks convoluted, but it's sort of also pretty, the MGPM, or the multiple goal pursuit model. And it's a dynamic model of goal pursuit, and it proposes that individuals regulate their, or pursue their goals through 4 self-regulatory agents. So we've got up top, we've got our task agent, our time agent, expectancy agent, and then choice agent. I will skim over the details, but I am happy to go into more detail if it would be of benefit. But essentially, these 4 systems work to detail discrepancies between our current state, where we are in the pursuit of our goals, versus the desired state of achieving or avoiding those goals. Literature has shown that this model is able to account for the effects that we see, is able to account for observed behaviour. I'll give you just a quick example so you can get a better feel for the model, but the task agent, for example, here, it would look at how far you are from achieving the goal in terms of the amount of work you still have to do, and that discrepancy would inform your expectancy of achieving the goal. Similarly, your time agent looks at how long you have before a deadline to achieve the goal, and again, that discrepancy informs your expectancy, which ultimately will then feed down into what we think is a likelihood of being able to actually attain the goal with the amount of work and time we have remaining. And ultimately ends in choice, which is us choosing between one or the other. This feeds back into our external environment as well. So when we make a decision to pursue a goal and we progress a goal and act on it, that ultimately then affects our current state. We've stepped closer to achieving that goal, which then feeds back in, and we do a loop of going through this process and adjusting our performance accordingly. Now, the part that we aren't aware of, which is just over here on the very end that I've added in, is how this system, these mechanisms, this process is affected when we consider the decisions made by other agents or other individuals making decisions at work as well. So, and this is at the crux of what I sort of look to identify in my PhD is, how do multiple decision makers, how do maybe a group or a team of people making decisions around work make these prioritization decisions when pursuing multiple goals? I should note that, just quickly, the current model, without this little other agents bit, this current model is designed for an individual pursuing goals. So that's why the little other agent, which you can't actually quite see, is actually just a smaller version of the model again, because it hasn't previously considered the impact of multiple decision makers. So why is this in particular important to consider other agents? Well, if we look at, I suppose, these examples in particular, if we think of, I mean, medicine's being sort of at the forefront with COVID, in sort of an emergency room, a hospital, you expect, I suppose, a team of physicians to make accurate and timely diagnoses to treat potentially acute illness where they, as I say, balancing goals of efficiency and accuracy, but where the incorrect allocation of those resources, whether they prioritise efficiency or they prioritise accuracy, could have fatal consequences. If you're too quick in your decision, you may overlook alternatives, which could mean loss of patient life. If you are too worried with accuracy and don't act quickly enough, again, could be a loss of patient life. Again, quite fitting. We think about the current situation in Ukraine. When we have for example, America looking at the moment, the debate around whether to be troops on the ground. There's a balance here between deterring Russia and defending democracy. And without inciting further violence and warfare, I guess. So there's environments where these decisions to balancing difficult decisions or weighing up pros and cons isn't as easy as our everyday, or isn't as easy as doing your Wordle, for example. These environments are complex, they are sometimes time pressured, and where incorrect allocation, as I say, can be potentially fatal. So this is the term distributed tactical decision making. While very technical, is what I'm essentially alluding to here. The challenge of managing these competing demands in dynamic and complex environments under the time pressure, when there are multiple decision makers to also consider, when there is potentially limited communication between these decision makers, and as I said, when the consequences for incorrect prioritization could be fatal. What I mean by limited communication, again, the example of defense, often when combat teams go in to do what they do, an open line of communication between them and their sort of mothership, if you will, has the potential to be intercepted and then used against them, I suppose. So at times there will be teams operating without oversight or without a easy mode of communication. Again, we see in Ukraine with things like communications down. We've had people in towns stranded and again looking to make difficult decisions in time pressure. It's complex, it's hard. And I certainly have felt that trying to address it in my PhD. This is also sort of has paired nicely with defence in the sense that they have approached us, said something like, you guys are so amazing, so incredible, we really want to work with you. But no, they have come to us as well with this problem of decision-making in distributed tactical systems where the stakes are high. And so what we identified based on what our discussions with defence, as well as sort of where we are in the literature, is that there's a need for models that can simulate how people make decisions in these difficult, complex, time-pressured, potentially fatal environments. I feel like if I just say fatal enough, you'll all think it's important and listen. And the solution for us was to develop an experimental analogue of this decision-making environment, of these distributed tactical decisions, with the end goal of extending our multiple goal pursuit model to be able to consider other agents. Which is, coincidentally, the nice aim of my PhD. is that to take that existing model of goal pursuit, extend it from a single agent self-regulatory framework to that of a multi-agent decision-making model that can inform distributed tactical decision-making. All right, just quick touch point. Are we all there? I'm using some technical terms I was nervous about throwing them around, but I hope you're all with me. Yes.
So this is a project that's funded through the science.
Yes, I don't have to deal with the funding element of it. I'm sorry. Yeah, it seems to be a strategic priority, and certainly in discussions we've had, they seem interested in what I'm doing. So I assume they have a vested interest, probably financial. So this is sort of where we should transition to the actual part of the PhD that I engage with, or me on the ground sort of type work. And it was broadly broken into sort of two phases, first being an empirical investigation, so just a series of experimental studies. Again, we first looked at individual goal pursuit, which, while counterintuitive, we actually needed to first see that this environment, this defense environment, and this concept of distributed tactical decision-making, the MGP could actually account for effects in this environment, and that those effects were sort of in line with what we typically know of multiple goal pursuit. And then from there, we were able to extend what we knew and look more so at the processes and mechanisms of what I've got here, dyad goal pursuit, which is the goal pursuit included, so we've added one additional decision maker. We've got two in this sense. And then we have phase two. And so there was, I suppose, other reasons as well for looking at individuals first. Is obviously the time and cost associated with recruiting multiple people into the lab at any one given time, and then also COVID. So we weren't allowed to do that. So we also, we transitioned to remote learning and did the focus on individuals in that respect. So happy to talk about that as well. Phase two, we looked at the computational modelling. So this was part of the work where we extended the MGPM and looked to determine what were the necessary mechanisms that needed to be added to the model, or added or removed. I don't think we removed anything, but that were necessary to account for other agents and this problem of distributed tactical decision making. So for our studies, we completed a series of 7 studies. I will go through 6 studies. I will go through them in more detail in just a minute. But the paradigm that underpinned the research and the experimental tasks that then was developed based on this paradigm was one that was designed to be sort of an analogy of a single missile defense scenario, one where you've got 2 assets, or in this case, spaceships, and 2 threats, in this case, aliens. Here, the goal of the task was to protect the spaceships, which are under threat from these aliens, while conserving the weapons stock here. And I might just spend a little bit of time sort of detailing the task, because I think it is, people may have questions. Essentially, each of the studies, we were able to manipulate different variables using different inputs. So here up on the top left-hand side, we've got number of shields. So this refers to the level of harm that an alien can inflict when it hits a spaceship. You'll note a spaceship is surrounded by the semicircles. They represent shields, which is sort of a metaphor for health of the platform. So when a alien of this large size or shield travel down and hit a spaceship, there was the potential to lose 4 shields in one go. And ultimately, a loss of shields resulted in the death, I guess, or destruction of a spaceship. Other things that were manipulated were things what we call P hit, or the probability of an alien actually hitting its target. So here you'll see that this trajectory line is green and it says 40%, where on this side we have one that says blue and it says 80%. And this referred to there's an 80% likelihood that it will make a hit on the target, whereas this is only 40%. I think yeah. And then we had those three variables now. So as I say, I'll go into the actual levels and things. What I'm going to attempt to do, instead of, as I say, not give you all the information about every study I ran, is to sort of outline broadly, this is the task we used and how I manipulated it, and then take you into a little bit more detail on just one of the studies to give you a bit of an idea. Things like the value of preservation and conservation were also manipulated. So here we have, these are our weapon stock. So these are the number of fireballs in our arsenal that we can then shoot to destroy, potentially intercept and destroy these aliens. These have a value at the moment, so it says -3. So every time you fire, you lose 3 points from a starting value. Start with 300 points, you lose 3 for every time you fire. Again, shields have a value as well, so the loss of those, that's the first one there, is a loss of 18 points. When you do fire a weapon, there's a 70% chance that it will actually, or kill, a 70% chance that it will actually kill the alien. So there's always a level of uncertainty that it may not actually hit through and kill it. And effectively, the scenarios were created such that there were the different scenarios, they had different levels of starting shields, strength, starting weapon stock, and then they would go through a wave of incoming aliens, and over the course of that time, individuals and then later dyads had to coordinate this goal pursuit process using their resources strategically to try and keep both spaceships alive while also minimizing sort of, I suppose, the weapons they use. Is that if they use them up too quickly, then they may not be able to defend themselves later as they were able to repeat fire. Does that broadly give you an idea? It may be that you want to clarify something later, that's completely fine. We've spent now a number of years with this task, so we're quite familiar, so I may not realise there's something that's unclear. Oh, and I will actually just quickly, when this task was sent to participants remotely, they completed it as an individual, where they were responsible for both spaceships. Whereas in the dyad mission, we had participants in the lab, but in separate cubicles, and they they were responsible for a spaceship each, and they didn't have the ability to communicate how they coordinate on which platform, which alien, they fired on. So the decision was they could fire from either spaceship onto either alien, so long as they had weapons available, and it was up to them to make, at their discretion, to manage those resources and make those decisions. And they didn't have to fire either. All right, so just very quickly, so as I said, both online and in laboratory, and this is first year sites. Again, very thankful that is a whole thing we're allowed to use and abuse. And then these are the series of studies. So there was 7 studies. Study 2 was a bit of a two-parter. The first one, we manipulated harm. So this is actually a snippet from the first study. So we've got here the levels of harm being manipulated, as well as the p-hit and trajectory lines. Health and weapons, as I said, this refers to the health, these are the weapons. And so forth and so on. I talk about conservation and things in terms of the numbers. Time to contact, which I haven't mentioned, is the time it would take for the alien from its starting point up here to reach the spaceship. So after this was after study 4 is when we started doing, so study 5 and 6, when we introduced the dyad component. So people would come to lab and do them as either individuals or in a team of 2. And study 2A and 2B differ in that we changed the peak kill. So in study 2A, the peak kill, as I said before, was 70%. So the likelihood that if they did fire on an alien, there was a 70% chance that it would intercept and kill the alien, their weapons. The 5-ball, but in study 2B, you reduced that to 50%, and that was a sort of a test of increasing the difficulty of the task, the level of uncertainty. Again, any questions at this point? There will be time for ourselves later. So to give you a brief idea of what came out of this whole series of studies. So again, focusing in on study 1, where we manipulated the level of harm an alien could inflict, as well as the probability that it would actually intercept a spaceship or hit a spaceship. We did a mixed effects logistic regression. So we took our data and wrangled it into a binary format where we looked at the likelihood of protecting yourself or protecting other. Now, that lends itself naturally in the dyad condition to self and other, but in the individual condition, self referred to, and I might just go back so I can refer to, a self decision would be when an alien was directly, you defended from the spaceship, you defended the spaceship targeting the alien that was directly targeting that spaceship, as opposed to defending other, which would be this spaceship fires to destroy or fires onto this alien here, which is a show of other. That makes sense. So what we found was that different variables had different effects, obviously. Series of main effects and interactions emerged. In study 1, for example, we saw that as the level of harm increased for the alien that was targeting your stealth spaceship, the prioritization increased. So you're more likely to fire on a high threat alien that was targeting you. And then that was particularly likely as well as the P hit, or the certainty that they would actually hit you, increased. Sorry, I'm aware this is potentially confusing. Again, feel free to ask questions. And then you see sort of the opposite effect with protect other. So you're increasingly less likely to protect other as sorry, I'm confused. You were less like, so as other harm increased, you were less likely, to prioritize yourself. You're more likely to prioritize the other when they were experiencing a high certainty that it would hit, so a high hit, and a high level of harm. So you're more likely to help the other person when they were in need, but more likely to protect yourself when you were in need. So yeah, it was a bit of a summary for what we found overall in those studies. There was sort of a tendency to prioritise the most discrepant goal, or the goal that was in the worst position, either the goal that was facing the highest level of threat, or was, in the worst position, I guess. What we did note, as I said, that backup support was provided typically when your personal resources were high. So you had the opportunity to expend resources to the other, but then again, only when the other really needed it. Yes.
Can you tell me exactly what the is?
It's choice. Sorry, it's choice. Choice between prioritizing self and prioritizing other. So it's from it's a 0 to 1, 0 being prioritize other and 1 being prioritize self. So I'll go back and try and, sorry, again, potentially skip over. So if you were this spaceship and you were firing onto this alien, that's a self decision. But if you were this spaceship and firing onto that alien, that's an other decision. That's in the individual condition. Obviously, in the team condition or the dyad condition, if this was your spaceship, then this is self, and then that would be other. Sorry, it's a bit of a confusing way to explain it. Yeah, so we looked at, from, as I said, 0 to 1, 1 being to prioritize self. So you can see here it decreases, likelihood of prioritizing self decreases as the platform in the other spaceship, their other harm increased and the other harm P and the other P hit increased. But then the opposite, when you're more likely to prioritize yourself when you were facing high harm and high likelihood of being hit. Is that a bit clear? Sorry, I skipped over the D bit. only important. So then this sort of led us, so we had those observed results, and it led us to phase 2 of our project, which is the computational modelling, as I mentioned. So for those who are unfamiliar, computational models, they just articulate theory in sort of quantitative terms, so using mathematical formulas, which then, when we execute those, they simulate the processes of the dynamic theory, or of the theory that of interest, and this produces quantitative results and patterns that we can then look into and gain insight from that we wouldn't otherwise observe. So it takes sort of written theory, converts it to maths, spits out data, which then we can graph and look at and say, oh, this is what's happening, and sort of discern insight into these processes that are otherwise not very easily accessed. So again, I'm trying to save you the gory details. So I will go over a little bit of what the approach was. So firstly, we needed to examine different parameters. So we looked at alternative models and how different interacting with different parameters or mechanisms, how they affected the model and how well that then those models were able to account for the data. So we did this by looking at model fit, which is a sort of a quantitative test of a model where it's compared to empirical data. So the empirical data we already obtained, we compared the model that we coded up, and the prediction from this model was then, the predictions this model spit out was compared to each of the empirical data, the studies from the empirical data, and where there was strong alignment between the two, where the model was able to sort of capture or effectively account for the results of our empirical data or observed data, we would say that it was a good fit. It was an accurate representation of the processes that occur then in real life when we're doing these decisions. So quickly, I'll go through the different iterations of the model that we looked at. So we started, so our base model was one that included a theta parameter, which is a threshold, which is a threshold for making a decision, how we accumulate evidence and then eventually make a decision, and our threshold for that it differs, including this essentially introduces a level of noise in our data, which sort of accounts for individual differences, things like that. And I should say, Tim and Andrew, feel free to correct me at any time if I have already made a mistake. A second looked at including that theta parameter, but also including gain. And so what I mean here is it's the conservation and preservation weight. So the value of preservation or the value of preserving weapons or versus the value of, the value of preserving shields and spaceships versus the value of conserving weapons, because they both come with a cost. Adding different weights to that, or adding a weight to those values so that their importance or the way that we manipulate their value had an impact on the model, weighted the model differently. Is that sort of how you conceptualize that, Tim? Yes, I feel like I bumbled through it, but we got there. Theta and gamma. So again, we just looked at theta, but then added this gamma parameter, and this was less led by theoretical insight or what we knew already about multiple goal pursuit, and more about what we found when we looked at our empirical results, which was that there was tended to be this bias to protect self. So yes, while the other was in a bad position and we had high resources personally, we would offer this backup support, but we still tended to prioritize ourselves more so than the other. It wasn't a 50-50 split. There was this bias. And so we decided that was an important inclusion in our model. We added this gamma bias parameter. And then we looked at a complex model, which included all three of those parameters. And for one of our experiments, the one that included time to contact, I looked at time to contact. We also included tau, which is a time discounting, so we tend to, the value we place on events changes depending on how temporally distant or near they are, and so that accounted for that effect. But the tau parameter wasn't included in the other 6 studies, if you will. So here I've got just a quick example of a comparison between the empirical data, the model, and across two versions of the model. So first here, this is experiment one data again. So we're looking at Han and Pipit. And we see here with our theta model, we've got our lines. I'm sorry, that's a bit hard to see. These lines here are the empirical data. These are the effects we observed from the data, whereas the dots are the model. So you can see that the dots are sort of replicating the direction of the data quite well. So it seems that our model we've coded up seems to be capturing the effects a little bit. But when we add a gamma in that bias parameter, as I said, that was sort of led as an insight that came out of actually studying our data, you can see the fit improves quite significantly with the dots sort of overlapping at times with these lines. I'll just briefly give you a rundown of the graphs. Again, it's kind of confusing, but for this, just this window here. So this is the likelihood or this is P1, so spaceship 1 firing on to alien 1. So then this is spaceship 1 firing onto alien 2, spaceship 2 firing onto alien 1, spaceship 2 firing onto alien 2. That's what these different panels represent. And so this, you're able to observe the different behaviours depending on self-phenomena again. I don't want to go too much into that because I don't think maybe you'll get too much out of it, but more so to show that in considering different parameters, different mechanisms, we're able to improve the fit of the model. And in the end, we actually did find that this theta gamma model generally was the best fit of our data. We found that adding in the conservation preservation weight or the gain parameter didn't do much. So all this was hopefully for something. This then sort of goes to the implication side of the research. How do we then use this information that we have and this model that can replicate, I suppose, distributed tactical decision making? That really doesn't roll off the tongue, does it? So what it can do is, I suppose, function as the model can function as a decision aid that can assist in anticipating the actions of others and determine what goals should be prioritized given the likely action of others, if that makes sense. So if we're better able to understand the behavior of other decision makers in our team or in our group, we can then adjust our behavior and our decision making accordingly as well. So for defense, this is quite obvious. This provides more agile decision architectures, means that as the decision architectures are more robust as they are used in ever-changing environments where there are potentially unforeseen circumstances. We have a better idea of anticipating behaviours, things like that, which hopefully would lead to an operational advantage across the continuums of conflict. Would mean superior performance for our armed forces, theoretically. Hopefully we'll never find out. But sort of more generally, for our organisations, the organisations or the teams that our organisations are built from, for them to be competitive and effective, they have to work well within the groups that they organise around. And they have to be effective and make similarly informed choices around their resource allocation. Anyone, is there, I suppose I'm at this sort of stage where I'm writing this part of my thesis. So I'm interested in your input around what the implications for this sort of research could be, how knowing the likely decisions or how a model that can sort of mimic the decisions that people are likely to make in a group setting, how that could impact your experiences at work, potentially. Emma, you look so keen to contribute.
I guess I'm wondering what you think about the healthcare. Just mention that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Looking back to the paradigm of medicine. yeah, again, it is, I suppose, I think where it can come in handy is around when we see issues of team coordination around things like social loafing, or when people assume someone else has made that decision and things get lost. I think there are efficiencies and streamlining processes that we can aid in that space. Yeah.